Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, and welcome to this semester's second Power Lunch. I am Jennifer Banda, the director of the Center for Women in Law that is housed here at Texas Law. And at the center, our mission is to help law students and lawyers confidently build, navigate, and advance their careers. During this month's Susan Blount Power Lunch series, we are introducing you to prominent lawyers from a wide range of career paths for a thoughtful conversation on legal careers and lessons learned. Today's event has been certified for 1 hour of ethics CLE. So if you are in the room, make sure you sign in so you can claim your CLE. If you are streaming on Zoom today, and we have a very good number of people streaming on Zoom, we will note your presence. If you called in by phone, please email us with your name so we can make sure you get the CLE information. So welcome to those in the room and to those on Zoom. And this is a Power series. So mark your calendars because on October 23rd, next week, we welcome Arlise Upton Key, who is a career federal FDIC banking lawyer and the current president of the Texas Exes. So this series is named after Susan Blount, who was a founding member of our center, who's generously served as our interim director in 2019. This speaker series and all of our programming is only possible through the generous donations of all of our members. So I encourage you to check out our website for future programs, and we would love for you to support the center. Look for a link in the chat because we want to make it real easy if you want to donate. So let's get to today's main event. I am thrilled today to introduce you to Carrin Patman, a 30-year litigator and a United States ambassador. Carrin returned to Texas earlier this year after serving as U.S. Ambassador to Iceland from 2022 to early 2025. For more than 3 decades, Carrin was at Bracewell, where she was a partner representing clients in high-stakes litigation. She was the first woman elected to Bracewell's management committee. In 2023, Carrin and her husband, Jim, established the Patman Center for Civic and Political Engagement at the LBJ School for Public Affairs, which aims to strengthen democracy by training public service leaders and creating opportunities for civic participation through a big tent approach to dialogue and debate, needed more now than ever. Carrin is extremely active on nonprofit boards and for worthy causes. She served as the first woman board chair of the Harris County Metropolitan Transit Authority. In addition to a very long list of awards that she has earned, she's the recipient of the UT School of Law Distinguished Alumna for Community Service Award. She graduated with honors from Duke, where she and Texas Law, where she was a member of Law Review. She is a founding member of the Center for Women in Law. So we are thrilled to have you here today. I'm so excited to be able to have a conversation with you about your career and everything that you have done and continue to do in life. So can we go back to the beginning a little bit? Let's start at Texas Law. What were your interests in law school, and how did that help you land your first job?
Well, I'm looking out in the audience and seeing my very best friend from law school and one of my best friends today. And I'd like to say that our interests were studying really hard, and we did. On her family's boat, we would go out and and we would study. And anyway, but no, in law school, I always knew I wanted to be a litigator, and I had debated in high school, as Jan had, and I just kind of knew that was a path for me. My family was in public service, as you know. Both my grandfather and my dad served in Congress. My mother was on the Democratic National Committee and very involved. And in fact, my grandfather, Wright Patman, served 47 years in Congress. And one of his successors, whom the Patman family loved, was Jennifer's dad, Congressman Jim Chapman, who is my husband's fraternity brother. So it's all such a small world. But at any rate, growing up in a political family, obviously, too, I became practiced at advocacy for my family. And so I thought litigation was the path for me. I will say that Jim, my husband, Jim Derrick, was a transactional lawyer at Vincent & Elkins for many years. And he really loved that. So as you're considering your career, I encourage you to look at that as well. You might think you know what you want to do, but you might enjoy something else too. But anyway, Jan and I did a lot of mock trials and moot courts together. And so, of course, now she's on the district bench and a standout judge. And with her daughter, Allie, who's here today, too, my little baby girl, and who I'd like to go to law school, but he won't. But anyway, you can't control people, but
you can lobby real hard.
no, I tried. I said, "Don't you want to come here?" As we were looking around earlier. But anyway, it just served in the Biden administration. So anyway, I knew I wanted to go into trial law, and that did turn out to be a wonderful path.
So you entered, did you go straight from law school into Bracewell?
I did. I did.
Tell us a little bit about your law practice there.
Yes, I was there for actually 34 years. I was a corporate litigator, trying high-stakes litigation, first as a baby lawyer on a team, working for a mentor, and then I did that on my own and had my own team, and I loved it. There are a lot of bumps. If you do go through a big law firm, there are, obviously in any part of your practice, a whole lot of challenges along the way, but you just power through and just be sure and learn your craft. That is one thing I did right, is I did focus on my law practice when I was there, and I actually learned my craft, which opened up opportunities for me on down the road. So I had a wonderful career. I really, luckily I did.
So in the 34 years at Bracewell, what are some of the highlights when you think about that?
Well, I think the highlight for Bracewell for me was the people, really. And as you're looking to the firms or the institutions you want to affiliate with, it really is important, the character of the people and the culture of the firm. Bracewell at the time everybody was very hardworking. However, there was also a real sense of collegiality and support, and we're all going to go through difficult times in our life. And the ones that I went through, my colleagues in the law firm were just right there with me and supportive of me. So it was a wonderful culture, and I think that's very, very important. It doesn't mean you won't work hard. In order to learn your craft, you have to work hard and should work hard. But I do encourage you to find a place that you feel comfortable in and that you like the people in.
So you were the first woman elected to Bracewell's management committee. What are some of the lessons learned from being that first?
Well, it was a really amazing experience. And I did learn what you are going to find out, those of you who are women in the room, and that is that gender bias is deep and you have to surmount it. And it's not purposeful. When I sat on the management committee, we did compensation for the lawyers, and they presented people's economics in bands. They grouped people by, the people that had a similar level of collections or billable hours, they grouped together, and you went through the bands and decided who needed to go up in compensation and who didn't. And so we would get to a band, and there'd be two guys and a woman, and it's, oh, yeah, Joe needs to go up. Oh, yeah, And then you'd get to Susan, and it would be, well, she's probably okay where she is. And I'd say, wait a minute, guys. Wait a minute. Look at her numbers. They're similar. Of course she needs to go up too. And then the guys would look, and they'd readily say, yes, oh, gosh, you're right. But if you don't have somebody there in those councils of power to advocate for you, we will be overlooked. And I'd like to tell you that gender bias no longer exists, but we all know that it does. We all see it in the political sphere and in other spheres. It's more subtle than when Jan and I went to our law firms ages ago, but it's there. And so you have to have somebody in the councils of power. The same thing would happen with committees, the most important committees, the finance committee. Start throwing out names, and they'd all be guys. And I'd say, well, how about, oh, yeah, she'd be good too. Yeah, let's put her on. But you've got to have somebody there. So when you're choosing your leadership in any institution, just be sure that you remember that it does matter to have someone of your gender who understands your issues at the table. Otherwise, as the saying goes, you're on the menu. Chop, chop. So, yeah, it's really important.
I think that's excellent commentary and excellent a viewpoint of that. So thank you for saying that. I want to talk a little bit about public service because you mentioned and gave a little bit of the history of your family. So you were raised in a family that valued public service and public policy engagement. And you've made that very clearly, you've made that a priority in your own life. So you are 34 years at Bracewell, litigating, helping manage the firm, very active in public life. How did Ambassador come to be on the menu, as you would say? How did that arc enter into your life? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was interesting. I had always been very involved in the political process. Back in the day when you actually sent out mail for candidates, not emails or not social media. When I was 4 years old, I licked a stamp on a mailer for my dad. My mother had done the same thing for her dad because he too, both my grandfathers, my paternal and maternal, were in public service. And so I had always been steeped in the political process. And then when I got to the law firm, I pretty much focused on my practice and learning my craft. But then once I became partner and once I had a little more discretionary time, I became very re-involved in the political process and became a fundraiser, a bundler, as they call it. And I was bundling for Hillary in 2016. We had known the Clintons, having grown up in politics. Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton came to Austin in 1972. And I was in Austin High School. My mother was on the Democratic National Committee, and the headquarters was right down from Austin High. And I would walk down and volunteer after high school was over, and my mother was there. And so Bill, at 25 years old, and Hillary were there, and I got to know them some. And of course, the rap really was, you may have read this, but people would say, gosh, Hillary could be the first female president if it wasn't that Bill was going to be president. And then we had the opportunity, actually, as it turned out, to possibly have both of them. It didn't work out. But anyway, so I was always steeped in that. And so when Hillary ran in 2016, I was heavily, heavily involved for her. And then when that didn't work out, though, my mother said to me, she said, Carrin, you do all this political work. You work so hard, and you never ask for anything. You never ask for an appointment to anything. And other people do, and men do. And so why don't you try to be an ambassador? Well, it seemed like a really lofty goal. But when Jim and I got involved for President Biden very, very early in 2019 and worked our hearts out for him, and with Allie right there in there, they sent out an email after the election, and they said, if you're interested in serving, and they sent it far and wide, and they said, if you're interested in serving, let us know. No guarantees. Let us know what you'd like to do. There are all sorts of boards and commissions. There are all sorts of things. We'd just like to know your interest. And so I said, well, I'd like to be an ambassador. I decided to lean in. And so thankfully, that did work out. Eventually, they called me and said, would you like to go to Iceland? And I was over the moon for a lot of reasons that we'll talk about when we talk about Iceland. And Jim was game. He went with me, and it was just an experience like no other. And I'm so lucky to have had it. But it wasn't my great legal skills or any of that. It was political involvement. And I had never been a diplomat in a formal sense. So there are two ways to do it. You either come up through the ranks of the State Department or you are handpicked by the president or his team. And usually we are sent to allies. Iceland is a NATO ally. And so those are the ones that we get.
So I have never had the opportunity to visit with an ambassador, so I'm very excited to do this today. Tell us, was there a typical day? What is it like to serve as an ambassador? I have so many questions.
Well, it was really interesting. It's not a social role. I've actually never had a harder job, and I was a trial lawyer, and I also served 6 years as the first woman chair. Thank you, Mayor Sylvester Turner, of the Metropolitan Transit Authority of Harris County, which is a $1 billion agency with 4,000 employees. And he had wanted to break that barrier, and we were close friends, and he asked me to do it, and it was a real blessing. We achieved a lot together. However, as an that was a hard job. That was a hard job. It was a volunteer job. And this was too. There are innumerable things that you do. You meet with government officials. There are things the United States wanted from Iceland, and we wanted from them. So you meet with government officials, you meet with their staffs. I went out and met with all the businesses that are American businesses that had presences in Iceland, and vice versa. The Icelandic businesses with presence in the U.S. spoke to groups, spoke to college students and high school students about the relationship between the United States and Iceland, the overall mission. So there was no typical day. It was always many, many different things. And I'm leaving out a lot of things. And there were receptions and there were dinners and that kind of thing. But really, it was a very substantive job and a very interesting one. So if you have an interest in the Foreign Service, I developed an enormous respect for the people that do come up through the ranks of the Foreign Service. And my team was just A+. And so if you have an interest in that, I think it's also a very valuable career path.
And did you engage with Iceland's leadership, NATO?
Yes.
Just sort of all of the international players.
All of them. The funny thing, when you're the ambassador, you are the highest level United States official in a country. You report directly to the president. So even if a general comes over, technically, he reports to me. Now, nobody stands on that, or I certainly didn't stand on that kind of form. But that's technically the thing. So Iceland is a very valuable NATO ally. And if you can envision, here's this island, and there are these two maritime passages on either side of it. And the Russian submarine bases are up here. And in order to get into the North Atlantic, they have to traverse those maritime passages. And it is the last chance the United States has to monitor what Russian subs are out there. They can detect them in the waters there, and they monitor them. So Iceland plays a really pivotal role in the NATO alliance. And I got way off track here. You
did it. I asked you exactly that.
But there was a lot of
level.
Yes, there was a lot of engagement on that. The United States had wanted Iceland to allow our submarines, our nuclear-powered submarines, to be able to come into those maritime passages offshore and have a boat that would go to the island, so that if you needed to offload a sailor who was sick, if you needed supplies, you could do that. And they were very hesitant because fishing is a major part of the economy in Iceland, and so they were leery of nuclear power. So it was really a several years negotiation. Our subs weren't armed, but they were nuclear powered. And so it was really a several years negotiation to get that done. It started before I got there, but I'm proud that it consummated when I was there. They do allow that. And now under my successor, who's my chargé, she's my deputy chief of mission, but she's now serving in the role of ambassador pending confirmation of someone named by President Trump. Under her leadership, now they can even come to shore, which is a big, huge victory. So that's the kind of thing you deal with on them. You'll go meet with officials and say, will you please vote for our candidate for this commission at the UN? Or will you, there's just a lot of substantive interaction, and you really need to, I studied a lot too of what was going on.
I can only imagine. And you said, so the chain of command is the president is really reporting to with your team.
Yes.
And with assuming a significant amount of international relations expertise too of the people that are.
They are just so knowledgeable. It was really a blessing to serve with my team.
Amazing. So what was your favorite part of the job?
Well, I will say my favorite part of serving in Iceland was the empowerment of women there. The first democratically elected female president in the world was in Iceland in 1980. Her name is Vigdis. Everybody just calls her Vigdis. And she was a single mother, and she was encouraged by a group of fishermen to run. She was a public personality, and she didn't really she hadn't thought about running for president. And they did a petition, and they say, we know women can run things, because when we're off fishing, the women run everything in our house and in our business too. And so she was persuaded to run, and she won, and she served, I believe, 16 years. She was there when President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev met in Reykjavik to try to eradicate nuclear weapons, which didn't quite happen. But I got to meet her. She's 94 and going strong. And I got to meet her, and Jim did too, as one of our first encounters. So the women's empowerment there, the current president is a woman, the prime minister is a woman, and there's a coalition government with 3 parties, and the heads of all the parties are women. So it's a place where women are empowered, and we're far behind. We've got a lot of work to do. But it was glorious to serve there, and I met so many wonderful friends, and everybody's was tremendous.
So what was, the or some of the biggest challenges as serving as an ambassador?
Let me think about that one. I think the biggest challenge was, first of all, you never wanted to embarrass the administration. So you were always on your toes and very careful about anything you said in public. And you're always on, no matter where you go. I had a driver. That was fun. I had security. We had a chef. That will never happen again. And in fact, I was in Washington right after the election, and I was having a conversation with someone, actually in the Hay Adams restaurant, and this person overheard the conversation that was sitting there and didn't like what was being said. She was on the different side of the political spectrum. She came up and got in my face, and a very strange-looking person, and was reaming me out in the Hay Adams. And my first thought was, where's my security? And then I realized, oh. So anyway, but that, it was, I didn't really, Iceland's a very safe country, but it was just nice to have that backup. So that was not the answer to the question you asked me.
Well, just the biggest challenges.
Oh, the biggest challenge. I think the biggest challenge for me was just being on all the time. You're never not on when you're out in public. And in Iceland, a small country, everybody knows everybody. In fact, the first reception we had for Christmas, after I'd arrived, I said, well, okay, we obviously are gonna have name tags, right? Because I didn't know anybody. And one of my staffers said, oh, no, that would be offensive to people here. Everybody knows everybody. So, well, I don't know anybody. I don't. Yeah. So we did have name tags, and it became a tradition. But everybody, once you're there, it's very collegial country, knows who you are. So you can't be a jerk ever, which I'd like to say was really easy peasy for me, but wasn't always.
So were there any of your legal skills that you think transferred into your role as a diplomat? I imagine there would be.
There definitely were. First of all, advocacy, when you're trying to persuade the Icelanders to do something that the United States would like them to do. Advocacy skills, negotiation skills, knowing when to press, knowing when to pull back, as you do in settlements, and also as part of your advocacy, even to a jury, knowing when to emphasize a point, when to sort of let the jury come to it on their own. And so, yes, it was very, very helpful training for that.
And then what about more on interpersonal, personality? kind of what, there's the legal side and then there's the,
No,
other
you're so
side of
right.
it. So, kind of what do you think was key there to being a great representation of the United States?
Well, I do think that it was very, very important, knowing how to navigate the professional world. And also when I was at Metro, that was a job in which there were many stakeholders, few of whom were satisfied at any given time with how the buses and trains were running. So you got a lot of incoming. But certainly in the legal world, learning how to work within a law firm context and being in law firm management was enormously valuable.
I would imagine that. So let's talk a little bit about the Patman Center for Civic and Political Engagement, which we mentioned is at the LBJ School. So tell us about, why you founded that center and what your goals are for that center.
Well, it was my husband's idea, Jim Derrick's. He came up with the idea because he was a transactional lawyer, and he was aghast, as we all are, at the polarization in our society and the inability to listen to alternative viewpoints and not seize up, when the other side says something we think is ill-considered. And so he was very close to my parents, and so he said, why don't we try to do something about this? Why don't we, form an institution or fund an institution that will try to teach people to bridge their differences across the aisle. And so he developed the construct of it, and we then brought it to different institutions, but the one that made the most sense was, of course, the LBJ School, because we were Texans, and also my grandfather was a very close friend of LBJ's. Granddaddy was elected in 1929. And LBJ was elected, I think, about 20 years later. And my grandfather had served with Sam Johnson, LBJ's dad, in the state legislature. And LBJ would often tell the story that his dad would say to him, when you're in doubt about how to vote up there, vote with Wright Patman. So they were very close, he and Speaker Rayburn and my granddad. And so it just seemed very, very obvious. So Jim wanted to spend some of his own money funding it. I spent some of the money that my mother had left me funding it, and we endowed it. And it's just been going fantastic. We have the most wonderful executive director, Emily Bandari, who's here today. And with the support of the dean and Emily's energy, it's just going great guns. We couldn't be more excited. And we have internships, we have classes. Is it this summer? Now we've gotten through the summer, so it's this coming summer we're actually going to have internships at Oxford and England. And so it just couldn't be going better. And I hope you'll avail yourself of some of the programming over there.
And so are y'all engaging with the law school or with some?
Yes, I'd love to.
Some of the synergy that I would imagine is there in the different parts of the institution of UT?
We are. That is certainly the purpose. And, I think right now, I'm not sure, Emily would know best, what programming.
I'm Jonathan Lass as a faculty affiliate.
Oh.
School of Law faculty member, and he's a faculty affiliate of the Patman Center. And he teaches the negotiation for public affairs class in the spring. So that's
right. And we've certainly been interested in working with the center because we've talked about that. And so we look forward to a lot of collaborations with the center.
Well, and to that end, there is a symposium coming up on women in public life also that you've been working on, correct?
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yes, thank you. Mrs. Johnson, whom I'm sure none of you knew, but who I did have the blessing to know, Lady Bird Johnson, and Liz Carpenter, another standout, 50 years ago, arranged a Women in Public Life symposium at the LBJ School. And so this year, we're having an anniversary celebration of that. And it's on November 14th. And it's going to be great. We're having our iconic Senator Hutchison and Ambassador Kay Bailey Hutchison. We're having Senator Amy Klobuchar, and we're having a whole lineup of really impressive women. So I hope you'll consider coming to it. I think it's going to be great.
And so what advice would you give someone who's interested in public service? You know, how do you get that first toe in or first step in?
Well, obviously, I was just looking at all the booths outside in the Sussman Godfrey Atrium, and you can start in public service. You can go with Texas Appleseed or the Texas Defender Service or something like that. But let me just give you the caveat that you can also do a lot if you learn your craft, become a really good lawyer, and make enough money to support those organizations. So there's two ways to do it. You can bring your legal skills to it, or you can develop yourself as a professional, which can also open the door to either elected office. You know, Jan was a lawyer for many years before she ran for judge. And so you can do it that way too. And so I think, you know, the interest you have is just keep it in mind, but learn your craft first. Learn your craft first before you run. Absolutely. My dad always used to say, when I had my own very ill-fated run for Congress about 31 years ago, I thought it was in my blood. I decided it really wasn't. The voters didn't think it was either. But my dad would say, when they were trying to talk me out of it, saying, you cannot win this race, you're not analyzing the district appropriately, he would say, it takes 10 people to talk you into it and 10,000 to talk you out. And that is true. And so, you know, it's a hard road in public service. I so admire the people that put themselves out there right now with the best values and run for office. It's really hard, as you know from your dad's experience.
It is.
Yes.
It is. Like all things that when you do it, you have to go all in.
You have to go all in. Yes.
You do. So how you've done a lot of different roles, chaired things, and been on boards, been on committees. How do you take that first step to getting into that? You said learn your craft and be a really good lawyer, but then...
Well, I just got involved supporting candidates. I mean, that was very comfortable for me because of my family, but I just got involved supporting candidates and raising first very modest amounts of money for local candidates. And then over time, I just got more and more and more involved and just plunged in. I mean, people need people that will do the work. In fact, I'm helping a congressional candidate right now in Houston, a really outstanding woman endorsed by Emily's List. And, you know, people will say, oh, listen, campaigns are chaotic. They're chaotic. It's like being in a really tight jury trial. And there are a million things that need to be done, and there aren't time to do them all. And people will call you up and say, she needs to be doing this. She needs to be that. Well, she needs to be getting out a mailer to X. Well, are you available to help develop that mailer and get it out? Because let me just tell you, there is no time in a campaign beyond the basic things. And so, or she needs to come to this group, you know, she needs to, and so your help in a campaign, even on a pure volunteer, non-fundraising basis, and well, yeah, I'll organize that event. I'll get that group of people together and I'll arrange the appearance. It's just so, I mean, Allie O'Connell did all the social engagements for the White House. Can you imagine? And what an enormous endeavor for the Biden White House to get all of that together and make sure all the right people are on the guest list and people calling or griping. And so it's just organization. And if you're willing to plunge in and do it, you'll be very, very welcome.
So what would you say is next on your to-do list?
Well, we want to be very involved with the Patman Center to the extent they'll have us. We're so proud of what's going on there. And I will continue to raise money for candidates because I think we're at a critical time in the country. no matter what side you're on, and I will be continuing back in that fray. And then I hope to have some time with my husband. That would be wonderful. Never seem to get enough time with him, but anyway.
So I noticed a theme in a lot of the things you've talked about today is making sure you're lifting up others around you. And you've seen that just from your referencing of the people in the audience. So how your leadership style, kind of what has been your leadership style in terms of, I mean, you've chaired, huge entities, been an ambassador, kind of, what would you say is important to you when you're leading?
One of the lessons I wish I'd learned earlier, and finally at almost 70, I've learned how important it is to make the team that works for you feel valued and appreciated. I can't say as a young lawyer when I was under stress and tearing around that I always took the time to consider the feelings of the people working for me. And that was a mistake. And as I've gotten older and learned more about leading, I've learned how to do that. And I'm more comfortable in my own skin too. I'm not always running around terrified that I'm going to screw up. And so I think making the people that work for you really feel valued is absolutely imperative. And I finally learned to do that. Thank you, God.
So that's an interesting question, and that may have been the answer. But when you look back at your younger self, at Texas Law, is there something that you would, say, what advice would you give your younger self?
Well, I guess the advice I would give those of you entering the profession today, based on my experience, would be, first of all, empower others. Empower others. Don't deal with these micro-competitive aggressions. Empower other people in your practice. Second, be aware of gender bias, and have a sense of humor about it. People will in a very well-meaning way, say boorish or foolish things to you. And unless it's really serious, have a sense of humor about it, because generally they think they're being cute or clever or complimenting you or something like that. When I started at the law firm, my husband and I were laughing earlier. I was young, I was cute. Everybody assumed I had been a sorority girl which I never was in a sorority, looking to marry a well-heeled lawyer, that I was biding my time in a law firm. And one of my colleagues came in one day in my class, this was when I was a first-year lawyer, and said, and this was, by the way, over 40 years ago. It was in 1982. And so there was an early wave of women in the profession. And he said, why are you doing this? I mean, you're cute. You could find a nice guy to marry you. Heck, I'd date you. And I was like, actually, no, you wouldn't. Fortunately, despite opportunities like that, I held out for my husband. But at any rate, there was a pervasive attitude back then of, why do women want to do this? And it's a little different now, but women and men are different, and you just have to be aware that you're going to have to maybe power through more than men would in the profession, and do power through. Keep a sense of humor about it, persist, power through. And then the other thing I would say is lift as you rise. That's really important. Once you've powered through and you have attained your goal of where you want to be professionally, just make sure you lift up the other folks that have come behind, that are younger than you.
I have recently learned the term laddering up, where you try to...
Yes.
But I really like lift as you rise.
Well, that is not original. When I was chair of the Metro Board, there was a well-known woman in transit who used that in a speech she gave, Lift as You Rise. And I just thought it was so beautiful.
That is worth noting to memory. I like that a lot. So looking back, having, on your ambassadorship, now having been home for a little bit of time, kind of what are your takeaways from that experience?
Well, one of my takeaways is that our allies are our superpower in the United States. The NATO alliance, when Russia invaded Ukraine for the second time in February of 2022, President Biden, and let's give him some props here, he and Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, had already anticipated the invasion, even though nobody, including Ukraine, thought it was going to happen. The Russians were amassing all these troops on the border, but nobody in Europe, and even Ukraine, didn't think they would actually do it. But Tony Blinken and Joe Biden did. And so they went to the allies and they said, this is going to happen, and we need to be prepared with our response, our collective response, the moment they invade. And we were. Really onerous sanctions went into place. Putin was dumbfounded that the allies were immediately in solidarity in standing for Ukraine. And then eventually 20 other countries that aren't in our formal alliances joined. And Iceland was on the front lines of that. They welcomed Ukrainian refugees. They sent warm clothing to Ukraine. They gave aid. I mean, they immediately saw, as a small country, this could affect any of this kind of outrageous aggression in violation of international law, in violation of the UN Charter. And so they really have stood firm, and I'm very proud of them. And what I learned is the importance of our alliances. You may not know that the NATO alliance has an Article 5 that basically says, if I'm paraphrasing, but if one of us is attacked, all of us are attacked, and we all stand together. When is the one time that has been invoked in the history of NATO? You're absolutely right, 9/11, on behalf of the United States. So our allies are of critical importance, and we should nurture them and value them. And that's one of many lessons I learned.
That's phenomenal. Your experiences and all of that.
It was
interesting.
So enriching. It really was.
So to that end, I'm going to ask one more question, and then we can move to some questions from the audience if you're
sure
to that. So with the country more divided than ever, I think, and maybe not, but in my lifetime, but I know there's a long history in our country, and what you all are trying to accomplish at the Patman Center. Just talk to us about the importance of, engagement and being active in what is happening around you.
I think one of the extremely concerning aspects of our recent politics is kind of the hopelessness, not voting, not exercising that power. I mean, turnout was way down in, say, for example, the last election, and not recognizing the importance of civic responsibility. So that will be part of our mission. But also, it used to be, when my family served and when your dad served too, that people were able to come together on issues and work across the aisle and come up with compromises. Nobody got everything they wanted, but they were able to move the ball forward. And now I will say, and I love the man, so I'm biased, but Joe Biden actually managed to accomplish an incredible amount. Infrastructure bill, Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, it's a remarkable legacy because he did have a gift for doing that. He never let anybody get to him. They could throw slings and arrows at him, and he could keep his eye focused. And LBJ too. Now LBJ had a different technique. You know, he could either flatter you or get right in your face, and you thought he was gonna, yeah. But he got it done too. And so whatever technique you have, I need to find a Republican to praise too here. So who would it be? Because I am partisan. However, I do recognize the achievements of a number of Republicans, and I hope the Gaza peace holds. If the Gaza peace holds, I think we just need to give some props to President Trump because they did get that done with the involvement of the other Middle Eastern countries, et cetera. So let's hope it holds, and he'll deserve credit for that.
Do we have any questions from anyone in the room? There's a microphone right behind you so our people can hear online.
I have two questions, but I can save the second until others have had an opportunity to ask. But my first question is, as you were in private practice and coming up through the firm, how did you navigate your political involvement with your employment? Did you hold your cards closer to your chest? Did you wait for a second career? You don't strike me as someone who would have. So how did you navigate that, especially living in a Republican state?
Well, it's a very good question because, of course, most of our clients are Republican. I came to the firm a known quantity. I'd grown up in a Democratic family. Everybody knew that. My parents knew members of the law firm. So, but I did, until I made partner, I focused on my career. I mean, I did a few minor things, but I focused on my career. And even as a young partner, I did that as well. And so I think, and then once I became more involved, had more autonomy, the firm has always been very politically involved, more on the Republican side, but actually Cersei Bracewell, who's one of the founders of our firm, was a Democrat. He was a well-known, well-regarded state senator. And so they actually liked the fact that they had a presence on the Democratic side of the aisle. Jim Chapman ultimately was my partner too. And he was, of course, a Democrat. But yeah, it was something that our firm fortunately valued, and I was able to do it. And if you do plan to be really involved, that's another thing to look for in a firm. I mean, right? But don't get politically involved until you've established your practice, period, end of paragraph. The best thing I did was establish my practice first because it opens up so many doors. When I lost my congressional race, I was never so relieved as to have a wonderful law firm to go back to. And I wasn't terribly, I had mixed feelings because running for Congress is very hard. And then one of my big donors who showed up at all my events, we got married.
That's one dating policy.
Yeah, right. That was it wasn't online. It was on dating. He was also my client, but anyway. Any other questions?
Other questions in the room?
Hi, thanks for being here. Is this working? I would consider myself more mid-career. So I'm starting to look at roles kind of outside my specific career trajectory into boards and commissions and things like that. So I was wondering if you had any advice for someone who's moving into a role where you have to demonstrate leadership or authority in areas where you don't have the subject matter expertise that you do at work.
English. Don't worry about it. That is a very female question. Men would never ask that. I don't know if you've ever read Dee Dee Meyer's book. She was one of the press secretaries for President Clinton, but it's titled something like Why Women Should Run the World. And she talks about how, women we're always really worried that we're not going to know what to do in the role. We don't know the subject matter. We don't. And whereas men, men come out of college with a C average and say, I'm going to be an astronaut, No offense to you guys in here, but don't worry about it. You can absolutely, with your training, learn any subject matter on a public board or a private board. Absolutely. And if you do go on a public board, and I encourage it because I think it's a wonderful way to serve. The Metro board, I served before. Anise Parker, who was then mayor, appointed me just to the board, and I had a important committee role. And then when Mayor Turner came back, and this is funny because he called me about it, and he said, "Would you be interested?" And I said, Jim and I had just been doing door-to-door for him, and I was just exhausted. And I said, I think I'd like something easier because Metro is very high profile, and it is very, you're always getting incoming from people that want you to do this or that. And so I said, maybe something a little less stressful, but it's also a full-time job. And then Jim said, "What are you doing?" He heard the conversation. He said, "You're always complaining." I would have been the first woman in the history of the agency to chair it. He said, "You're always complaining that women don't lean into these opportunities. And here you are." And he said, "And furthermore, you've actually been on the Metro board. You actually do know the subject matter." Now, that should not have deterred me because none of the guys that had served before me knew the subject matter of Metro before they got on the Metro board. Or chaired it. So don't let that deter you. But I actually did, and I was still deterred. And so I called him back and said, "You know what? Of course I'd like to serve. What am I thinking?" And so he did bless me with that opportunity. Don't worry about it. If you do go on a public board or another board, one way to easily learn the agency is read the budget. It will be public. And if you read through the budget document, you will know pretty much what you need to know, and then research it like crazy. When I went through Senate confirmation, I was terrified of not knowing the answer to a question. So I just learned the subject matter of Iceland completely. I was still terrified, but I learned the subject matter of Iceland completely. And yeah, I knew Iceland. I'd never been to Iceland. I didn't know much about Iceland before, except that it was a good place to travel. So you absolutely can do that. Don't even let that stop you for a second.
But once you're off the board, are there any established gaps you share the look for?
Well, I, as I mentioned, I read the budget. I read the Metro budget, which was written in such a way that it had a whole lot of information, down to how many buses and trains there were, et cetera, et cetera. And then I just researched it, and then they will educate you. The board, the staff of the board will educate you. And you can ask. I mean, Lex Frieden, who was one of my board members under Mayor Turner, was a disability rights advocate. He had been in a serious accident when he was young and was in a wheelchair, was paralyzed. And he actually worked with President George H.W. Bush to write and pass the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so he was on our board. And he sent a list when he got on the board of about 30 questions for the staff to answer, very detailed. And they did. And I read that too, and it was very handy. But I wouldn't hesitate to ask for information. You can research a lot in public data. If there's an annual report, if there's this or that, you can learn a lot. But don't be intimidated by the fact that at first you'll be drinking from a fire hose on something. And you'll also bring a fresh perspective. Once you learn the facts, you'll have a fresh perspective that will be very valuable to the board. I really encourage you to go into public service in that way. Anyone else?
Okay, so my second question is, you have been running the race for nearly 50 years. You've been climbing mountain after mountain, and it strikes me that you haven't slowed down. So what is your fire, and what are the factors that have contributed to your longevity?
You know, I have to say, I think, first of all, my parents were both driven people. My dad was a very humble guy. One of the people that worked for him when he was in Congress said he is the most egoless politician I've ever met. And he really was. He grew up, my granddaddy back in the day was famous. He was chairman of the banking committee. He was really well known. And so he grew up in the shadow of that. It never diminished him. We all adored my granddad and revered him. But he just didn't think he was that big a deal, even though he accomplished a lot and was a great guy and a gentleman always. Never this kind of behavior, never that you see today. But my mother was a force of nature, and I think I really have to have gotten my drives from her. Jim knew them both. Well, Jan and my mother were very good friends. We joked that my mother loved me more, but she liked Jan more because they agreed on everything, including what I should be doing, you know. So anyway, but I think it was my mom that gave me that drive, because she really never gave up on anything and accomplished a great deal. Okay. I'm so glad to be with you all. It's been really fun for me, and I hope that if you have any questions that come to you later, you'll keep in touch and email me, or Emily knows how to find me, and appreciate your coming.
Ambassador, you're amazing. You are.
I'm not.
You are literally lifting others up as you rise. And that is still today, it's very obvious, even from the conversation in the room, how important that is to you. And that really means a lot to all of us to have you here.
Well, let me say,
too.
I benefited from that. Many people mentored me, women and men on the way up, including my parents and my husband. Marry somebody who's a really great person. That's another good, and who's supportive and who's not threatened by your own career trajectory. If you do that, and who has a sense of humor and who's handsome and all that.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Just as a reminder, if you are in the room today, don't forget to sign in to get CLE. If you are online and you are Zooming, we have you logged in. If you are on the phone, make sure you email us so we know you're here and we can get you the CLE information. Join us next week for our last Power Lunch of the semester with Arlise Key, the president of the Texas Exes and a longtime FDIC banking lawyer. And can we please give the ambassador a huge round of applause, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Well,
I do.